Giro here for Umbra Games with a review of The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, played on PlayStation 4, but also available on Xbox One and PC. I know I'm almost a couple of years late to the game here, with its original release date being May 19th, 2015, especially because I've owned it since November of that year, and I even forced myself to finish the first game after multiple attempts, and finish the second one in 2015 with a review you can catch on my channel. The way I always sum up the first two games in the series for people that ask is that I love the world of The Witcher. This world that Polish author Andrzej Sapkowski created is fantastic. Every monster has an origin, the lore and politics are extremely deep, and Geralt of Rivia is pretty much the equivalent of a dark fantasy Batman. But the first two games were nearly unplayable. The combat in one was an exercise in monotony, and two felt like button pushes were commands to tell Geralt to do something rather than to just control him. With Witcher 3 though, that's a different story. Now, if you're not familiar, Witchers are monster slayers, often moving from town to town, taking contracts to solve mysteries, locate beasts, and slay them, always for coin. There's a pretty harsh trial for one to become a Witcher, administered as a young child, and failure means death. Witches are mutated humans that can consume potions that ordinary humans can't, that bestow powerful abilities for limited durations. They carry a steel sword for human and beast opponents, and a silver for the supernatural, strapped to their backs. The story of Witcher 3 Wild Hunt involves hunting down one of Geralt's former wards, a young, white-haired woman named Ciri, who appears to be pursued by a fearsome group of elves, known as the Wild Hunt. As a quick side note, elves and dwarves are viewed a bit differently in The Witcher than a lot of normal fantasy. They're considered subhuman garbage, and most race relations are not healthy. As Geralt gathers clues to Ciri's whereabouts, he can navigate the massive open-world environment to take monster contracts, assist folks with side quests, explore the hidden and guarded treasures, as well as destroy monster nests, race horses, enter fist-fighting competitions, and play games of Gwent, a popular card game that replaced the dice poker minigame of the first two. The sheer amount of content in this game is nearly unbelievable. I would venture to say if you took on every quest and solved every mystery, you'd probably be at about 100 hours or over, which is more content than any base Elder Scrolls game, and more than even the most recently released Final Fantasy XV. While some activities like combing the wilds for monster nests and guarded treasure can feel somewhat filler-like if you focus solely on it, the quests do not. Each exclamation mark leads to a short story, where you often use Geralt's Witcher senses by holding L2 to pick up trails, find hidden passages, and discover clues to hauntings and murders. Quests that involve combat have a suggested level on them, and I'd say the one downfall of the quest system is that focusing on doing everything will get you overleveled quickly enough that your reward will often be one experience point, which, as mentioned, the content is well done, but with diminishing rewards can rob some of the motivation. All dialogue in Witcher 3 is fully voice acted, and the performances are solid. Witchers are robbed of emotional expression through their trials, and while some might find Geralt's lack of vocal tone variance dismaying, just shift your mind to hear that lone cowboy or Ronin, just deep and gravelly. You're often presented with dialogue options to help shape Geralt the way you want to be, and while sometimes this can be humorous and witty, I do find myself longing for a bit more consequences to my decisions. There are about 6 or 7 story points where your actions will determine the outcome, but for the most part, a lot just circles around and you're in the same place either road you take. I even reloaded a couple of quests, choosing different options, only to discover this outcome. I guess really the words illusion of choice is the best way to describe most of it though.
You're as good as dead.
I think probably the biggest inconvenience in game mechanics in Witcher 3 involves dialogue options, and that the circle doesn't back you out of dialogue with shopkeepers. I think as a rule, if there's a shopkeeper in a game, unless they have something particularly important to say, they should just take you to the shop screen, period. In fact, in order to skip through dialogue, you have to hit square once to pop up the option to skip, and then square again to actually skip it. Now, the combat in Witcher 3 takes place in real time. As you approach an enemy, Geralt will automatically draw an appropriate sword for the enemy type. You can use square for a quick attack and triangle for a strong. Geralt can raise his weapon in defense by holding L2, and when fighting human opponents it's often a good idea to parry with a well-timed block using L2. Geralt can also dodge with the press of the circle button and a direction, and can do a massive roll by pressing a direction with the X button. You can lock onto an enemy by a press of the right stick and switch your targeting with a flick of the same. In addition to steel and silver, Witchers use a form of magic known as signs, of which there are 5. These have varying effects, including fire bursts, magic traps, and stunning opponents. Stamina is the source of signs, and the only thing stamina is shared with is sprinting. Geralt can also construct bombs for use in combat, and there are several bolt types for the crossbow to provide bonus forms of damage. The most common status effects are burning, bleeding, and poison, which can be inflicted on foes and Geralt alike. Now, while you see the enemies level when you engage them, your skill can actually take you pretty far. Not everything is based on gear and character level, which is another thing that makes combat great. At one point, I took on a level 26 Archgriffin that had a skull over its name, signifying it was too difficult, while I was 19. Just by looking for patterns, striking during openings, and dodging like crazy, I was able to take him down. Now, a crossbow bolt counter would have been appreciated, especially while you're underwater, as your only form of attack is the crossbow. And it's often difficult to tell when it's going to be reloaded when you press the fire button, or when it's going to just shoot. This leaves you open under the sea, as well as when that raging griffin is plummeting towards your face. One other inconvenience is that the circle button jumps and climbs while out of combat, but merely dodges while in combat. Meaning in the few instances you're not on the same plane as your enemy for some reason, it can be a mite frustrating. And while it's probably good you can't loot while in combat, if the contextual X button popped up at the same time you're trying to roll, there'd be some confusion, but it can also be an inconvenience when you're in a combat through a long haul, part of the story. Gotta get that loot. Upon leveling up or discovering places of power on the map, Geralt will be awarded a skill point. There are a few different skill trees on which these points can be assigned, providing boosts to combat, science, and alchemy. Most skills can be improved with the addition of multiple points, and slots to equip skills open progressively with Geralt's level, for a total of 12. I did discover an herbalist that had a potion to wipe out all of your skill point choices, so you do have some room to experiment and delete it if you don't like it. A couple of the skill tree choices will open combat skills that use adrenaline that accumulate during battle, but most are just boosts to attack power or sign power.
Something for me.
Weapons and armor can be looted, purchased, and created by taking components to an armorer or blacksmith. Geralt has 4 equipment slots: chest, hand, feet, and legs. Both weapons and armor have slots for runestones that provide boosts to various statistics. Runestones can also be crafted. Crafting requires the discovery or purchase of diagrams and formulae. Crafting components can be scavenged from all over, but gear can also be dismantled for a price by various craftsmen. Alchemy works pretty similarly, but Geralt can do this on his own. Plants can be found and harvested all over the world, and combined with monster body parts and various forms of alcohol, Geralt can make potions for boosts, bombs for combat, and oils to coat his swords. One interesting thing about potions is each only has to be crafted once. If you take a moment to meditate, it will use strong alcohol from your reserves and replenish everything you've made thus far to its maximum. CD Projekt Red did an amazing job on the environments in Witcher 3. From trees waving in the wind across varied landscapes, to the architecture, the stone in the stained glass, to the swamps, and really just the ambient weather. Now, one thing I often bring up when discussing open world games is, what is the world filled with? I often contrast something like Skyrim to Red Dead Redemption. Rockstar boasted Red Dead had 5 times the square footage of Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, but I remember feeling when playing it that it really just made it take forever to get from place to place. Bethesda balanced that quite a bit by filling in the world of Skyrim with tons of hidden caves and events you'd stumble across. When I looked at each of the giant maps in The Witcher, I remember at first having that feeling of, man, I don't want to walk that far. But somehow you get places very quickly. They've somehow maintained this illusion that the world is endless, but you still manage to close those gaps. Now, it definitely helps that you can fast travel between the game's hundreds of signposts once they're discovered. It also helps that you can summon Geralt's horse Roach at any point while outside, just by double-clicking the left stick. Another key to transportation is the sprint, and while the stamina does deplete at a steady rate, while not in combat, regeneration of the bar is nearly instantaneous. Because why would you want your player to have to walk slowly when they want to get somewhere? I just contrast this to the recently played Final Fantasy XV, where I didn't realize how much of a big difference a small mechanic like stamina refilling out of combat can make. Now, you still have to be careful when you're sprinting hard, because if your bar is low when you stumble across enemies, you'll have to wait for that battle regeneration speed, which can occasionally catch you off guard. I have talked about this game with a few people that I know that have played it, inquiring whether having the knowledge of the lore from the first and second game is important, and I've also read the first novel. I do personally find myself fascinated that a lot of the content is heavily influenced by Eastern European mythology and monsters, which is a refreshing change from the norm. I think the general consensus is that they give enough keywords and information to get through, but I think knowledge of prior events makes this title a little more engaging. For example, and I'll keep this as spoiler-free as possible, but there's a quest involving Yennefer, a sorceress that Geralt has been involved with. This quest is called The Last Wish, where they examine more closely an event that transpired in their past. Consequently, the first novel in the Witcher series is also called The Last Wish. One of King Foltest's Gwent card's flavor text says, "It is natural and beautiful that a man should love his sister." The first adventure of the Last Wish novel is Geralt tracking down a Striga that was a cursed child that King Foltest had with his sister. It's also a quest in the first game. So, I mean, there are little things that interconnect that enrich the experience, but hey, that's why we have the internet, right? Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Gwent a little more, especially since it birthed the mobile adaptation of the same name. In Gwent, you face off against opponents while building a deck, and when a round begins, you draw 10 cards from it and begin. Each player has 3 rows in which to place cards: close combat, ranged combat, and siege. You take turns placing cards of various strengths in each, and the player with the highest total at the end of the round wins. Best of 3 takes the entire match. The strategy really begins here with special cards: Weather, that reduces the strength of each car in a row to 1, cards that double strength when played in the same round, Scorch, which destroys the highest card on the battlefield, etc. Cards can be purchased from merchants across the world, but rare cards can only be won by besting their owners. There are multiple decks to collect that offer various bonuses as well. I could actually see myself playing through this game again on a quest to obtain every card and beat every NPC player in the world. There's also a PlayStation trophy for getting them all. But this alone would take some dedication, as the first thing you'd have to work on when meeting someone new is to get them to play cards. Overall, The Witcher 3 is a very solid game from the viewpoint of its mechanics. That's not to say it's not without its faults, of course. There is some graphical clipping, like characters holding books open while their hand is resting at their side. I did fall through the ground a couple times and get stuck. I had one loading screen that wouldn't stop after failing an event that it was loading that I didn't even get a chance to play. I had one instance where it wouldn't let me dive underwater, and a pretty great looking little horse dance. But when I calculate the hours spent versus actual game-breaking glitches, it's not even a blip on the radar. I, for one, love the things I've read about CD Projekt Red's game production values. They've released 16 free DLC packs, including cosmetic items, new quests, and Gwent cards, in addition to 2 highly acclaimed expansion packs with dozens of hours of content, now available in a Witcher 3 Complete Edition. I've even heard that Witcher 3 was a proving ground for the technology for their next game, Cyberpunk 2077, which totally has me pumped, but that's a discussion for another time. So, if you want a massive open world with tons of quests and side content to explore, including a variety of objectives, deep characters that seem like they've existed long before you encountered them, well-crafted dialogue and high production value voice acting, strategic combat with a lot of options, tons of gear to acquire and things to craft, rich lore with a history and explanation of nearly every enemy type and mysteries to solve, all taking place in beautiful, mystical landscapes, and you can ignore some occasionally long load times, a few collision glitches here and there, and the dialogue illusion of choice, then you should definitely give The Witcher 3 a chance. Fans of Elder Scrolls games especially should give this a try if you haven't. Now, keep in mind, this is definitely the subjective part of the review, where I attempt to quantify my opinions. But rated as an action RPG, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt receives my all-time highest score, 98 out of 100, citing just the minor jump issues in combat and a sometimes awkward selling screen in the way cursors move. I'm actually sorry I didn't play this game sooner. This is Giro for Umbra Games. Thanks for watching. It's early in 2017 to have a Game of the Year candidate so strong, but subscribe to stay tuned with me to see if I manage to play anything that competes with it, or follow me on Twitter @Umbra Games.